So let's turn now to Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, a member of the House Oversight Committee, which has been dealing with the administration's handling of the southern border, among other issues. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ari.
What does it mean that the Supreme Court says this money can actually be used for now, but they haven't ruled on the merits, as we say, of the larger question?
Well, it looks like they may have even hinted what they're going to do in the underlying lawsuit. They said that the plaintiffs appear not to have standing, in this case, environmental groups. But the second thing that I would just point out is I believe that the government should not win on the merits of the underlying lawsuit, mainly because they need to show that Congress had not already denied funding for the purpose for which they're seeking the funding, in this case, a border wall. You know, back in the January-February timeframe, we had the longest partial government shutdown in history, and it was very clear coming out of that that Congress did not want to provide funding for the border wall. They only appropriated a fraction for certain border securing measures, but not the wall specifically. And so the third point I would just make is that I think this sets a bigger precedent than just in this case, namely that the executive can basically misappropriate money by declaring a national emergency. And this is a very bad precedent for the future.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that just the obviously wild part of all this?
Yeah.
Even though this is, as I mentioned, a little narrower ruling than the president seemed to suggest on Twitter, no shocker there. But if a couple bill can be moved around, then what's stopping a president from moving 10 bill or 100 bill? I mean, you know, sometimes it comes down to common sense. And if the scale were $1 or a cup of coffee that you guys didn't appropriate, I think reasonable people might say leave it alone. But if it's 3 bill, what's to stop 100 bill? And at that point, doesn't that completely undercut Congress's independent taxing and spending authority?
Well, the power of the purse belongs to Congress. And what this ruling does is it basically eviscerates that power. Now, interestingly, back in the April-May timeframe, you might remember the House and the Senate in bipartisan majorities voted to disapprove of the declaration of the emergency by the president. Interestingly, in the Senate, 12 Republicans joined with 47 Democrats. So 59 members of the Senate voted to basically disapprove of this declaration of the emergency. Not enough for a filibuster proof of majority, which needs 60 votes. However, very close. The question is whether any Republican senators were hanging back, expecting the courts to basically smack down the president's declaration. Now that we've seen what's happening in the courts, whether there might be some additional votes in the Senate to go forward with a filibuster-proof majority disapproving this national declaration of an emergency.
I'm realizing filibuster-proof majority, hard to get, hard to say. But
there's got to be a better word. There's got to be a better word.
I mean, lawyers and politicians, you know, always have extra fancy terminology, but we're keeping up with you. The filibuster being something that, as you mentioned, you have to get over if you want to do some of the accountability, and you have this president. Congressman, I know you've been all over this issue, and I really appreciate you walking us through some of it tonight.
Absolutely. I'm going to the border on Wednesday of next week, and, you know, it's really sad what's happening down there. I want to see how our monies that were newly appropriated are being used. We can't treat people the way we're treating them at the border right now.
I appreciate you saying that, and I think it's also an educational reminder for us. We use the term recess lightly. It sounds like you're using your recess out of Washington next week to go to work and do oversight. And I will say on behalf of MSNBC, I think we'd love to keep up with you and learn what you're finding down there.